introduce today's presenters and hand it over to them. Next. So the Alfred Group is a national full-service consulting firm working to strengthen the not-for-profit community. We've been around since 1979 and have empowered more than 3,000 organizations around the world to grow, improve, and fulfill their missions. From our offices in Chicago, New York, and Seattle, we offer customized solutions to nonprofit organizations, corporations, associations, and foundations in fundraising, strategic planning, organizational assessment of structure and impact, governance, and professional development. In each of these services, the Alfred Group bases our work on sound principles, guidance, tools, and structures that help organizations realize their full potential and greatest community impact. As we begin to head into the end of the year philanthropic push, for most nonprofit organizations, we really hope that today's information, the tips and tools that we're providing in our webinar today, and the rest of our series will help you position yourself to have the most fruitful fundraising campaigns possible this year. This series is designed to address key factors in leading successful campaigns and helping you grow your annual fund programs. If you haven't already, we really encourage you to register for our additional webinars in the series, and you can find that information on our website at www.alfred.com. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters and have them kick things off. First of all, just to remind you, today's webinar is titled Getting the Most from Your Board. It's a two-way street. And your presenters today are Molly Hansen and Laura Edmund. Molly Hansen brings over 30 years of experience in leadership positions within the not-for-profit community, including leading development teams at Northlight Theater, the Joffrey Ballet, and Youth Guidance. Over the years, Molly has focused her expertise on board recruitment, development and training, and management coaching. In addition to consulting on board relations, Molly also has a lot of experience serving on boards. Currently, Molly is serving on the board of the Abundant Life Spiritual Center, and Molly, as I mentioned, is based in our Chicago office. Laura Edmund, CFRE, who is with me right here in Seattle, brings over 30 years of experience in fundraising and development in the not-for-profit sector. She started her career at the University of Puget Sound and then spent 15 years with Multicare Health System before joining the Alfred Group in 2004. Here at the Alfred Group, Laura's expertise includes feasibility studies, campaign counsel, major gifts development, and board retreat facilitation. Like Molly, Lori has extensive experience serving on boards, including the boards of the Washington and the South Sound chapters of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. She also serves on the board of the Annie Wright Schools. Laura is a certified fundraising executive and is based here in our Seattle office. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I'm now really delighted to turn this over to Molly and Laura.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited that you are all here. A couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded, and there will be a recording available for you, as well as our slides after the event. Please look for an email later today with both of these, as well as a link to sign up for the additional webinars in the series. Everyone today is in the listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. We'll soon have a time at the end of our presentation to take questions. And if you have a question at any time during the webinar, please type your question, and this is how you do that. Simply click on the Q&A icon in the upper left-hand corner of your computer. That will open a window, and right there you can type your question. Your question will be viewable only to us, the presenters, and not to the entire audience. We will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end. Lastly, we invite you to join us on Twitter throughout the webinar using the hashtag NPOStrength. We will be live tweeting and invite you to join the conversation there as well. With that, let's get started. Next slide, please. So, getting the most from your board. It's clear we want something from our board members. At the same time, board members want something too. How do we all get what we want? Board members want to be effective, they want to have real impacts, they want to feel valued, and they really do want to enjoy what they do for our organizations. What we want them to do is what we want them to do. And as development officers, executive directors, CEOs, we just want board members to do what we want them to do, right? That is what today is all about. The next slide, please. So today's roadmap is, of course, we'll start at the beginning. It's a two-way street of getting what we all want in the realm of nonprofit staff and board members working together. So we'll start at the beginning. There will be board orientation and onboarding information, care and feeding of board members, philanthropy in the board, a summary, and then our question and answer time. Next slide, please, and Laura will kick us off at the beginning.
Thanks, Molly. I'm happy to be with all of you today and looking forward to presenting some great information and getting some great questions from everyone who's joining us on the webinar. One thing I want to start off with is if you're trying to get a great relationship with your board members after they're on your board, it's almost too late. Now, I know that sounds depressing, but what we want to stress is that it's much easier to get great board members doing great things for your organization if you start before they say yes to serving on your board. In fact, we think you should start with the recruitment process and ask yourself these questions. What characteristics do you need on your board? What kind of expertise do you already have on your board? What kinds of experience and technical skills are you lacking? And one way to do this is to take an inventory of your current board members. Simply create a chart with all your board members' names on it and all the different kinds of characteristics you need, and mark in the boxes where you have those characteristics and where they're missing. So you'll be able to easily see the strengths that you have on your board and the holes that might be there. That way, when you're thinking about potential board members, you know exactly what characteristics to hone in on, and you can get much better board members to complement the mix that you already have serving. One other thing to remember, whether you're a director of development or an executive director or more of a line staff role in the development office, do you have a voice in the recruitment process? Are you able to make suggestions to whoever is in charge of that recruitment process, whether it's a volunteer, a board member, or a higher up in your organization? As development professionals, it's important for us to share our expertise and our knowledge about good board members and characteristics of good board members with the people who are making those nominating choices and decisions. Another thing to do even before your board member says yes is to match expectations. Time and time again in our work with clients, we've seen that if we really dig deep into what the key issues are when board members are having problems with the organization and vice versa, it's because the expectations are mismatched or not in sync with each other. So think about what your organization needs and wants and expects from its board members. Ways to do this and to be sure that you can share the appropriate expectations with your prospective board members is to have a written job description. Do you clearly spell out the roles and responsibilities, the activities, the meetings, all the things that you want your board members to do and to be? Share that with them well before they say yes, when they're really in the process of considering whether or not to join your board. Also, think about what's in your bylaws regarding board expectations. I was working recently with an organization that unfortunately didn't have anything about philanthropy in their bylaws, and so right now we're working to change that through the process of the board and the governance committee and the executives of the organization. And finally, how does your nominations process work? We unfortunately see some organizations that, a few board members and maybe the executive director sit around the table and try to drum up names and look at their Rolodex, and that might work, but it's much better to have a bit more structured process and to have a nominations committee that seeks input from lots of different sources and then vets those candidates. And also think about the idea of bringing on a class of board members instead of single board members throughout the year. You'll find that those board members who come on as a class can feel much more part of a group rather than a lone wolf as a single new board member. Also, think about what the prospective board member needs or wants or expects. Every new board member comes on to a board with certain things that he or she wants, whether that's networking opportunities or they're just completely immersed in your mission and want to do a good job. We all hope that that's the case. But they might have other things in mind too. And so it's a good idea to interview those folks well before they say yes, to ask them to fill out a bio or an interest form to tell you what they're looking for, what kinds of expertise they might bring to the board, what kinds of activities they really want to engage in, perhaps even which committees they might want to serve on. And then you can work to match their expectations, their needs, their wants, their desires with your organization. And you're starting off on the right foot if you do those things. So I'm going to turn it back over to Molly.
Thank you, Laura. So now we have a match, matching expectations between board members and staff members. Now what? Board orientation and onboarding. Next slide, please, Laura. Attending their first board meeting the day their term begins is not necessarily the best approach for introducing new board members to the board, although it is common practice. Think about that. Attending their first board meeting the day their term begins. I've also worked with boards where new members are invited to attend their first meeting where they will be elected. Also not the greatest idea in our opinion. There are strategic steps that need to be taken that set the stage for active and passionate engagement. Board orientation should be about building relationships as much as it is about providing the beneficial information for being an effective board member. Building relationships, there's that two-way street. Relationships among board members themselves, relationships among board members and staff members. Next slide, please. So how do we begin the process of bringing them on board? One of the first steps is an excellent board manual. It's standard operating practice. A home for all of their stuff about your organization. They would want a hard copy and an electronic copy. Online board portals are becoming more and more popular and can also work. But we believe it is still important to review all the contents in person with new board members. And I love the idea of board members coming on as a class because, as Laura said, it builds a strong cohort. Let's just briefly go over what the materials can be in your board manual. There would be a section of organizational materials, your mission, vision, values, history, programs, outcomes, impact, participants and audience members. Then there would be a section on operational documents. This would include bylaws, the conflict of interest statement that every board member needs to sign every year and turn it back into the organization, board role and responsibilities, including financial expectations, and of course, ideally, you will have gone over this with potential board members before they've even signed on, or a member of the governance or nominating committee will have clearly gone over that. The current budget, the current year and quarter versus actual, ideally, board minutes from the last 6 months, and current committees and task forces with their job descriptions and the current members of each. Then we get into lists and calendars, a board contact list, the key staff contact list, and their roles with the organization so that board members begin to connect names and faces and what you do with your organization. Board and committee meeting dates, program schedules, class schedules, performance dates, as that's applicable if you're with an arts organization. And then finally, marketing and communication materials, such as brochures for programs. If a campaign is in progress, certainly those materials, events materials, and also we like to suggest a list of useful resources, such as books, publications, and relevant websites that are appropriate to the business of your organization and the mission of your organization. Let's move to the next slide. So we want to engage those new board members. Let's say that there's been an introductory orientation meeting and so they've gotten their board manual, and engaging them before their first meeting, there are lots of opportunities. And we recommend that you brainstorm with your current board members about what good opportunities and experiences there are for engaging new members. We've got a list of suggestions here, but given that your current board members know your organization well and what appeals to them, it's a good idea to seek their input. And that way they also feel engaged, that their ideas and suggestions are valued. Certainly, a tour is a must, perhaps even before there is agreement to join the board. Then once elected, begin the stewarding and educating and engaging process with your new members. These steps can take board orientation to an entirely new level of fully engaging new board members throughout their first year to build interest, connection, commitment, and passion between the organization, current board members, and new members. One suggestion is a meet and greet. If you're a performing arts organization, maybe that could be in the form of a final dress rehearsal. I've worked with a couple of theaters, and the final dress rehearsal was always beer night at the theater. Beer and pizza, and it was an opportunity for board members not only to see the work in progress, so to speak, but also meet staff members that they might not generally get an opportunity to meet, such as the crew. We also recommend a mentoring program, like a swimming buddy. So each new board member would be assigned a mentor, and that mentor would be someone who would check in with them between board and committee meetings, someone who would make sure that the new board member had a companion to sit with and chat with at board meetings. It's just a really low commitment, high impact opportunity for board members to really become a part of the organization. We also recommend Financials 101 specific to your organization. It's important that board members understand how the budget is developed and how it's managed throughout the year. They need to understand earned and unearned revenue for your organization if there are both of those categories. Where government contracts come in, because they may understand finances particularly well, but they may not understand them when it comes to your organization, and they will be so much more effective in budget conversations if they've had Finance 101 specific to your organization. We like to recommend field trips. Trips to sites where programs are underway. I worked for a youth service agency, and they have a program called BAM, or Becoming a Man. And BAM programs take place in Chicago public schools, and it's like group work for young men who are highly at risk of violence, drug abuse, and falling into really difficult times and not graduating from high school. And there are certain times in which outsiders can be invited into the circle, and it was such a moving opportunity for us to be able to bring board members and donors into that. So think about what goes on with your organization, a site visit, so to speak, that is particularly moving, and turn it into a real field trip. We also recommend small group meetings to discuss committee assignments. Get to know the board members' interests and talents, as Laura was talking about earlier, to make sure that they're joining a committee where they'll quickly feel they can add value. And in addition to the formal evaluation that Laura will talk about soon, we also recommend having one-on-one conversations about their first-year experience toward the end of that first year. Maybe the development officer or CEO, and perhaps even a current board member on the governance committee or board development committee, and check in with new board members about how this experience has been. Next slide, please. So we're really talking about a continuous process that actually ends up involving not just new board members, but longer serving members as well. So it begins with strategic recruitment, continues through the first year and even beyond, and it really serves as an excellent refresher and re-engagement process for current board members. Some ways that can, some activities that can be ongoing engagement processes are having board members share the path in their lives that brought them to this board at board meetings. Have them talk about the difference they are hoping to make by being a part of the board. This kind of testimony, if you will, engages board members with their hearts and minds, and through sharing at meetings provides an opportunity for others to tap into their own personal feelings and passions about the organization. Another basic to think about in terms of board engagement for new members is to think about the room setup for meetings. Serve food. It's always a good idea to be able to break bread together. Have tables set up so that people can talk with each other. Engage mentors, especially at these meetings. And when longer-term serving board members participate as mentors, or even participate in some of the onboarding activities, it can reignite their own engagement and passions for the organization. Overall, a continuous onboarding practice develops a stronger, more connected, and cohesive group. Next slide, please. So, this slide, this is what we hope board members will come to know and understand during their first year of service. We hope that they will know and understand the mission, vision, values, and programs of your organization. We certainly hope they understand their role and responsibilities and expectations, and that they begin to develop relationships and understand the context for their board membership. We hope they understand nonprofit board budget management and processes and tools, your organization's operational and logistical processes and procedures, language, acronyms, and definitions. Human services agencies, especially those working with children and youth, often talk about SEL. What is that? A lot of you probably know it's social and emotional learning. But if a board member is new to a human service agency and there's talk when it comes to outcomes with programs and reporting from program staff, and they're talking about SEL, they won't necessarily know from the outset what that means. And social and emotional learning is so important to our human service programs, particularly those dealing with youth, that it's important that board members know what the acronyms are. It's important for them to understand the lingo of your organization. And lots of resources, as I mentioned earlier, websites, books, blogs, share with them, and they will know. So let's go to the next slide, please. During this first year, we hope board members will be able to think and operate strategically about your organization, participate as active and engaged leaders, partner with other board members on committees, task forces, and projects, use their leadership skills to assist your organization in fulfilling its mission and vision, and effectively integrate into the board member role. I don't know how many times I've heard when I've been, as a consultant, conducting board retreats, that board members have skills in marketing and communications, for example, or human resources, and this just wasn't known to the rest of the board or the staff, and there's this wonderful gift that these board members have to offer that isn't tapped into. So let's be sure that we find out where their gifts and interests are. And let's move to the next slide. Board members will experience new and renewed excitement and enthusiasm for both new and longer-term board members. They'll collaborate and strengthen the board as a whole. They'll feel welcomed, understood, and valued. They will feel respected and included, and we hope we're igniting their curiosity and their sense of discovery. Starting with the next slide, Laura will tell us about the care and feeding of our board members.
Thanks, Molly. Once you've completed the orientation process and you're well into the onboarding process, and you might have board members who are now a year or so into their service, it's important to remember that we can't just forget about them. We can't just think, oh, everything's okay with those board members because we did the orientation and the onboarding. The unfortunate thing is seeing them at board meetings is not enough. In fact, it's especially not enough if your board only meets every other month or once a quarter. What happens in those instances is that if they miss a meeting, then it might be 4 or even 6 months between chances to see your board members. So think about the opportunity you have to visit one-on-one with your board members, to build relationships with them. And think about who they are as people, not just their role as your board member. What are their interests outside your board? What are their passions and personal interests beyond your board? Just a casual coffee or a lunch meeting to get to know them as people can really go a long way in helping them feel better connected to you and to your whole board. Before you have these meetings, think about and know what's working from your perspective and what's not working, so that you can begin to have some frank conversations about their membership and expectations that might not be met at this point. And during the meeting, ask them what's working for them. Are they enjoying their board relationship? Are there things that they think that you could be doing better? Is there something that they want to do that they're not able to do now? This is a great way to help them feel more connected to you and more connected to your organization, build a relationship with them as people. We also think that board evaluations are a critical piece of best practice for board work. In fact, it's a good idea to do it every single year. This is something that your board governance committee can be in charge of, or even your nominating committee if those are 2 different groups of people. And during the evaluation process, each board member gets to answer the questions about how they are doing in their own board service. This is kind of a self-evaluation. Do they feel they have met the expectations that were set out for them at the beginning of the year? They also get to evaluate the board as a whole. How is the board functioning as the governing body for the organization? And finally, they get to talk about how is the organization supporting the board and the board's work. And there are some great tools related to board evaluations. That's something that if you want to contact us after the fact, we'd be happy to provide you with some potential resources and even some samples of board evaluations. Another thing to think about is, we all have what I might call problem board members. I hate to be a little bit of disappointing in that regard, but quite frankly, no one has a board full of stars. And if anyone does, I sure would like to meet them, because in my 30 years of experience dealing with nonprofit board members, I've never seen one, and I don't ever expect to. In fact, I like to talk about the rule of thirds, and this is, if you take any group of 10 people, 3 of them will probably be stars. A third of them they'll be your A students. They'll do everything you want and more, and there'll be nothing wrong with what they're doing. Another third will be, B or C students. They're functioning appropriately. They're doing what you ask them to do, but they're not rising above average. Nothing wrong. They're just doing their jobs. And then, unfortunately, a third of them are probably not performing up to expectations. I like to say life gets in the way of board members performing their jobs well. We know that. Life gets in the way sometimes of us performing our jobs well. And if you have those people who are in the bottom third, are you an ostrich? Are you sticking your head in the sand and just hoping those problems will go away? Because if you are, they never will. It's important to think about what it is that you can do with those folks who are in the bottom third and help them either do better at their jobs through some one-on-one, quote-unquote, counseling sessions, or maybe it's just time for them to move on, take a different role with your organization, maybe move to a different organization. And I like to talk about the bless and release strategy. No matter what the situation is, if a board member needs to leave your board, find a way to acknowledge and appreciate and thank them for all of the service that they've provided to you, and then release them from their responsibilities. I can tell you about situations where I've had to do this with an organization. We were even able to help them avoid a legal situation where a board member needed to leave for some ethical and potentially legal reasons. And by treating this board member with respect and helping them understand that they had been a very valuable member of the board, but things had changed and this was not the right time for them to serve, we were able to help that organization practice a bless and release strategy that helped the organization and the board member leave on very favorable terms. So let's move a little bit along the road in our map today and talk about philanthropy and the board. Obviously, this is important to all of us, and it's important for all board members to realize that philanthropy is everyone's responsibility. It's certainly not just the responsibility of the people in the development office. It's certainly not just the responsibility of the development committee of the board. It's everyone's responsibility. The culture of philanthropy should flow not only through the entire organization, but through the entire board. This goes back to matching expectations, which probably sounds familiar to you by now. We've been talking about this a lot today. So the place to start, again, is before the board member joins your board, have them absolutely certain that they understand that not only are they expected to give, that is a gift, a monetary charitable contribution to your organization on an annual basis, but they are also expected to get. I hear many organizations kind of waffle on this a little bit, and they say, well, our board members need to give or get. If they help us get contributions, if they help bring us donors, then maybe they can take a pass on giving themselves. Or if they are corporate representatives, perhaps they're a vice president of a major corporation or a business owner, and their business gives on their behalf, well, okay, some organizations say that's fine, but quite frankly, we expect and we hope that board members will make a personally significant contribution. 100% participation on an annual basis is an absolute must, and oftentimes organizations will think about a minimum contribution on an annual basis for their board members. That's fine for some organizations, and if that's the culture at your organization and you're able to continue to recruit great board members, then go ahead and keep your minimum. Perhaps even think about raising it if you haven't done that in the last 10 years or so. But for most organizations, it's easier to think about focusing on 100% participation and asking your board members to make a personally significant contribution, whatever their personal circumstances, whatever their capacity. Ask them if they can make a contribution that is among the largest they make in any given year. Your board should be one of their, if not their top philanthropic choice, it should be one of the top 2 or 3. So that helps answer the question of many board members say, how much is enough? How much should I be giving? Surprise, not everyone likes to ask. We've worked with lots of boards whose development directors or executive directors say, we don't have askers on our board. We want everybody to be able to ask. But quite frankly, not everybody likes it. In fact, most people don't really like it. So the good news is not everyone on your board needs to ask. They don't all have to be great solicitors. Ask yourself, how many do you have right now? Do you have 1 or 2 or 3 people that are happy to go on solicitation visits with you? That's fantastic. I would love that. I would love it if every board had 3 great askers. And ask yourself, how many do you really need? Do you need to have 10 on your board who are great solicitors? And really, how many can you support? Because you need to spend time with each of those board members who are helping you solicit gifts. And that will take significant effort on your part. So don't worry about having 10 or 15. If you've got 2 or 3 that you can really support and provide everything that they need and make them your stars, then you're doing a great job. And more good news, there are lots and lots of other ways that board members can be part of the philanthropic process. We can talk more about that at another time. Another way to help your board members get involved and play appropriate roles in the philanthropic process and to not feel like a square peg in a round hole is to understand their strengths. Here are 4 different types of people, and it's helpful to think about each of your board members and which category they might fit best into. Are they a connector? Do they know lots of people? Do they work in a profession where they're engaged with a wide variety of folks? Do they have professional and social connections that are going to be valuable to your organization? Or are they a storyteller? Are they the person who always comes up with a great anecdote or a fun story to tell? Do they know your story, your organization's story, inside and out, and bring tears to the eyes of people that they tell it to? Are they a visionary? Are they the people who love being involved in your strategic planning process and looking to the future? Or are they a closer? Perhaps they have a job where, they're in a sales capacity and they need to close deals. Do they enjoy interacting and presenting investment opportunities to your donors or to others? And if you can help your board member know where they fit in one of these categories, then you can find the right job for them as it relates to the philanthropic process for your organization. I like this slide because it helps everybody understand that board involvement in philanthropy is an evolutionary process. Board members don't come on already being stars in philanthropy. And this shows how they might start at the volunteer level, believing that, yeah, giving is important. I understand that. And then they might say, yes, I'm definitely going to give this year. I understand that that's important as part of my board service. And then they'll move to saying something like, I'm going to give every year. In fact, I'm going to give more than I gave last year. And then they'll become an advocate for your organization. They'll open doors. They'll talk to others about your organization and help them understand why your organization is so important to the community. And then they'll move more up toward being an ambassador when it comes to philanthropy. They'll ask others to be involved, and they might even ask others to give. So keep in mind that this is an evolutionary process. Understand where each of your board members happens to be in this process and help them move to the next level as they feel comfortable doing that. So I'll turn it over back to Molly now to provide a little bit of a summary, and then we'll have time for questions.
So here we are, thank you, Laura, at the end of the presentation. What have we learned? So this is where we think there are some key takeaways. It all begins with strategic recruitment, targeting and finding people with the right fit and necessary skills to add to your board. Plus, making sure that expectations are clear and agreed upon on both sides, staff and board. Everyone can usually get what they want. Plus, onboarding is more than just an orientation meeting. A thoughtful year-long process can lead to a much more passionate and committed board member and the board as a whole. Plus, relationships, building solid and familiar relationships with board members through frequent one-on-one meetings, annual evaluations that address their work and accountability and how they feel about serving on the board of your nonprofit really encourages full and 100% participation financially and greater satisfaction. Plus, options. Not everyone is a terrific solicitor. If they were, there would be no shortage of development officers and out-of-sight board members. When it comes to the board, there are options for roles they can play in fundraising, as we heard Laura tell us, where they can have real impact on philanthropic revenue. Connectors, storytellers, visionaries, or closers. Put it all together, the two-way street of staff and board, and you get inspired and energized staff members, plus inspired, committed, and generous board members. Laura has a great tool to share with us to get us all working towards this today.
So I call this a simple commitment. I can't take credit for this, and unfortunately I can't remember where I first heard it. But you know, if it's a good idea, let's use it. And this is the way it works. A simple commitment is something that you can do by yourself without having to ask for permission from other people. It's something that you can do relatively quickly, something like in the next 2 weeks or so, and it's something that's not going to cost you or your organization a lot of money. So it's a simple commitment. It's one way to take that first bite out of the elephant, so to speak. And what I want you to do is take a few minutes to complete this statement. In the next 2 weeks, I will, whatever, to help get the most out of my board and to help the board members feel better about their board service. So you might decide that you want to set up a one-on-one coffee with a brand new board member or an existing board member. Or you might say, I will review the job description that we're using and make sure it's up to date. Or you might say, I will visit with my president or CEO and talk about who they're considering as potential board members and help give them ideas from the perspective of great philanthropic board members. After you fill in your sentence, then tell somebody. We all know it's human nature. If you tell somebody about something that you're going to do, you're much more likely to get it done. So tell a colleague, your supervisor, tell a board member, whomever you choose, and then take action and make another simple commitment. So you're simply eating that elephant one bite at a time, making a molehill out of what might seem like a mountain. So now I think we're ready for questions.
Right, thank you, Laura. This is Molly, and we have a number of questions flowing in, so we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. One question that came in over the airwaves, so to speak, is asking about establishing a young professionals board or a junior board. What ideas or recommendations do we have for that? And we would suggest, first of all, to make sure that the leadership of your organization, meaning the development staff, the executive director or CEO, as well as board leadership, make sure that this group has consensus on what the expectations of this young professional board would be. What do you expect them to bring to the table? What would be their roles and responsibilities? And then also, we recommend that there be consensus to provide the staff resources necessary to staff that board. Because there should never be a board or a committee of a nonprofit organization that isn't well staffed. You might think, well, you know, they really know what they're doing, they know how to run a meeting, they're really eager and excited, I think they could just do this on their own. Don't let them. You really need to be staffed and have them directly connected back to your organization and make sure that they have the organization's best interests at heart. I'd like to tell just a really short story about establishing a young professional board a number of years ago when I was the director of development with an organization. And there was a decision to establish a young professionals board. We spent an entire year with a core group pulling that together, and of people who would be the seed people on the young professionals group. We talked about the fact that the young professionals group would be expected to make a gift of about $500 a year. They were all in a position to be able to do that. That was also the crowd they wanted to cultivate. And that the board as a whole would have a fundraising event and raise money for the organization. So we have our kickoff meeting and invite people to the meeting and who aren't on the seed group, so to speak. So we're doing a cultivation recruitment meeting, and the chairman of the board, who was a lovely man, we adored him, he was a great chairman and a great leader, got up and welcomed to the group and really laid out the board extraordinarily well. And then at the end, he said, and you don't have to fundraise. I thought the entire room that was going to fall through the floor. And he did it intentionally because he was afraid people wouldn't want to do it if they had to fundraise. And the core group was really concerned about that, and we spent a full year regrouping and bringing people up to speed about making a gift and fundraising. So having consensus and support all the way around is really essential.
We have another question, Molly. I'm going to go ahead with another question. One of the things was, what kinds of things can board members do to help with philanthropy if they don't like to ask? So one of the things that I recommend as a very first activity is engage them in thanking donors, whether they're sending personal notes to donors to say thank you, or even better, getting on the phone to call a donor. That's a wonderful way to help a board member who has no experience with fundraising or is reluctant about fundraising to feel really good about what they're doing and to have some really wonderful interaction in the case of a phone call. Typically, I'll provide that board member with some questions that they can ask to get the conversation going. So I definitely recommend engaging board members in the thank you process. Another idea is to ask them to simply be a door opener to somebody that you maybe have been trying to get in touch with or connect to, that board member has a relationship with. Simply ask them to place a call or send an email and suggest getting together or coming by for a tour. That door opener process is usually pretty easy for board members to engage in. And then another thing that I really love to do is take a board member along on what I consider to be maybe an easy cultivation visit. You're going to see a potential donor or a current donor that really likes you and likes your organization. And during the course of the conversation, you can ask your board member simply to tell that person why they love your organization and why they're spending their valuable time and energy with your organization. And that is very empowering for the board member and really a wonderful way for the donor or the prospect to hear from a fellow non-employee, a person who's engaged in your organization because they really care about it. So here's one more question. Actually, we've had quite a few questions about term limits and our feeling about term limits. I'm actually working with an organization that is struggling with this question right now. They've never had term limits, but they realize that they need to begin to put some in place. We do think term limits are important. What we see often is that a single term is 2 to 3 years, and that the term could be renewed 2 or 3 times. So you're not losing continuity on your board in that way, and especially if you stagger when the terms are expiring, you're able to maintain a good sense of history and continuity across the board, but you're giving board members a chance to engage in a limited sense, and you're giving your organization a chance to renew and refresh and keep things current. This board that I mentioned earlier has several people who are now into their 3rd decade of service. They're still wonderful people, but in some cases they're getting a bit stale, and they're taking up a position on the board that really needs to be refreshed with new thoughts, new ideas, new opinions. So we are about out of time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Karen to wrap us up.
Well, there are still several questions that we just didn't have a chance to address, and so actually, if we just go back one slide, I encourage you to reach out to Molly and Laura with additional questions. I know they'd be delighted to answer that. So, you know, I just really want to thank my colleagues, Molly and Laura, for this great presentation and discussion. Really appreciate the questions that came in, and you know, getting the most from your board really is a two-way street. We have to make sure it works both ways, and so we really appreciate these great tips. Hope you've picked up some great tips that you can put to use, and also some things that perhaps even just good reminders about things you can do to cultivate relationships and with your board members, and set and manage those expectations to create that strong culture of philanthropy. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the 3rd webinar in our summer webinar series, and you can see here on this slide that there are 3 left, and our next one is on Thursday, August 25th, and it's titled Performing Surgery on Your Annual Giving Program. Doesn't that sound good? I can't wait. We're going to walk you through 6 specific elements to focus on to strengthen your annual fundraising program, and we really hope that you'll join us. We encourage you to register for one or all of these that are listed here, and as you know, you can register for free by just going to our webpage, which is www.alfred.com. Also, there were a couple of questions that came in about receiving this information. You'll receive an email later today with a link, and we also will ask you if you would please fill out a short survey to tell us how you liked the presentation today. You'll also be receiving a recording of the presentation, the full slide deck, and several people were asking about samples of board evaluations. We'll make that available to you by going onto our website, and you'll be able to download that. So once again, thank you so much for joining. We hope to see you virtually again in 2 weeks for the next webinar. And this concludes our webinar, and we will now be disconnecting. It is 12 o'clock. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.